Welcome to the Leesburg Public Library's virtual author visit by Jennie Liu. We are so excited to have her here today and excited for you to be able to meet her, learn more about her and her books, and we're going to get started. The session is being recorded and you are muted, but please use the chat function if you would like to ask a question. We will also be having a question and answer session at the end of the session. We think this is going to last about 45 minutes. We're thrilled to host author Jennie Liu today. Thank you so much for being here. Jennie is a young adult author, although we were just speaking before this session started about what that means, and I think she's going to fill us in a little bit later on that. She has published 2 books. The first book is called Girls on the Line, and the second book was just published about 2 weeks ago, Like Spilled Water. Yay. And because I work at a library and I had been working with Jennie on setting this virtual session up, I was able to get an advanced reader's copy of Like Spilled Water. So I've read this already, and I'll stop there for the moment. Jennie Liu is the daughter of Chinese immigrants. Having been brought up with an ear to 2 cultures, she has been fascinated by the attitudes, social policies, and changes in China each time she visits. She lives in Western North Carolina with her husband and her 2 young sons. Hello, Jennie.
Hello, thank you for having me here.
We're so thrilled to have you. What we thought I would do, because her books are very emotionally charged and they start off very strong. I would like to read a summary of Girls on the Line and the first page of Like Spilled Water, so you can get a sense of Jennie's writing subject lines and also style. Then she's going to take over and has some slides and some information, and then after that.
Thank you.
Not a problem.
Okay.
Hi, Betty. I just saw you joined and you muted, and have already started, so thanks for joining us. You haven't missed anything. You missed the introduction for Jennie, so say hi to Jennie. So your first book, Girls on the Line. Let's talk about this. Lily has just turned 16 and aged out of the orphanage where she spent her childhood. Her friend Yoon has promised to help her get work. Yoon loves the independence that her factory job brings her. For the first time in her life, she has her own money and can get the things that she wants. Nice clothes, a cell phone, and Young, her new boyfriend. There are rumors about Young, though. Rumors that he's a bride trafficker, romancing young women only to kidnap them and sell them to bachelors in the countryside. Yoon doesn't believe it, but then she discovers she's pregnant, the same day she gets fired from her job. If she can't scrape together enough money to terminate the pregnancy, she'll face huge fines for having an unauthorized child. Lulu wants to help her friend, but she's worried about what Young might do, especially when Yoon disappears. Isn't that amazing? That's Girls on the Line, and I know that Jennie's going to talk more about that. This is Like Spilled Water, the book that just came out 2 weeks ago, and I'm going to read you just page 1. I have told Jennie this already. Page 1 took my breath away. Normally when you ease into a book, you kind of get the feeling of what it's going to be about, and you're curious. This one, okay, here we go. Page 1. Having just finished final exams, my 7 roommates and I crowded in the narrow space between the bunks of our dorm room, singing to the blare of K-pop and dancing around the mess of clothes, bags, and books strewn all over the place. We're supposed to be packing up, getting ready to head back to our homes for the summer break, but the glee of being done for the year is bubbling over us, and we can't stop laughing and tossing the hairbrush microphone back and forth. I almost don't hear my phone ring over the noise. I bark out to Xiaolin to turn down the music as I ransack my bunk, searching for my phone under the pile of clothes. I answer the call. It's Naomi, my grandma, but I can hardly hear her. I press my free hand over the other ear and move out into the hall, but the connection is bad. The reception can be spotty in the countryside at home, and I can just see her yelling into her old flip phone as if shouting will smooth out the choppy breaks and static. I think I hear her say, "Your brother died." And now it's me who's shouting, "What? What did you say?" But the connection is already broken. That's page 1.
Thank you for reading that. I don't like to do the reading parts of these presentations, so it's nice to have someone else do that part.
You're welcome. I would like you to pronounce a name for me.
Oh boy.
Yawen? Is that right?
I
Yawen?
have to remind myself. Which book are we talking about? Oh, I have to look at them. I don't remember everything about the specific book. Which character?
Page 1 on Wakefield Water. I think it's Yawen.
Shaowun.
Shaowun. Thank you.
Put me on the spot there.
Well, go ahead and let's hear your presentation.
Okay. Well, this is the first time that I've talked about 2 novels at once. So the novels are not sequels to each other. People have been asking me that, but they do have a connection. So I prepared a presentation to talk about that, and we're going to share the screens. You know, both of the novels are set in modern China. You know, I'm an ABC, an American-born Chinese, and I've always been a big reader. But when I was growing up, there was very little literature that had, you know, Chinese people in it, that featured Chinese people. I can remember exactly 3 items, you know, during my school years, 2 of which were very short, like 1 or 2 page stories in the elementary kind of reading textbooks that you know, were based on Chinese folk tales. And the third one, whoops, oh wait, I'm going to share this here. Well, those are my books, and hold on, oh, got to figure out how to do this. And this is the third book, you know, The 5 Chinese Brothers, which was an American classic written and illustrated by white people in 1938. And although I loved, you know, the weird kind of twisted, dark story, the book was a little unsettling to me in the way that a 5-year-old can't explain, other than I didn't know anyone who looked like this. And, you know, the book has since come to be sort of controversial for its ethnic stereotyping, of course. I think there's a line in it that says, the 5 brothers who all look alike, and of course the yellow face illustrations. So, you know, it wasn't until college that Amy Tan came on the scene, and I thought, wow, stories about Chinese people. Everyone knows probably these books, The Joy Luck Club and The Kitchen God's Wife, which is my favorite. The Kitchen God's Wife is what actually got me interested in Chinese history. And it was also around that time that I learned about my father's life. My sister was an Asian studies major, and she wrote her senior thesis about my father's upbringing and his journey as a child refugee during the war between China and Japan, you know, leaving his family at age 14 and not connecting with them again until the 1980s or so. But it got me very interested in China, and then I started reading, you know, everything that I could find about China, which was mostly like dry history, dry history books, and a lot of historical novels, and a lot of communist revolution memoirs. And I actually started, with my sister's permission, writing kind of a fictionalized account of what happened to my dad in wartime China. And that book never got published, but I did get a wonderful agent through that book. And it was while she was trying to sell that novel that I started looking for a new idea for another novel. And And over the years, there had been, you know, all that other stuff that I was reading, but not that much about modern China except for nonfiction. But there was very little fiction about modern China, set in present day China for American readers. Of course, there was some translated fiction, but that's what I wanted to read. So I wanted to come up with a story idea. That's the real trick. And that's when I thought about the adopted Chinese girls that lived in my neighborhood. And over the years, I had seen lots of girls being adopted from China. And that got me thinking, well, there's really not that much for them. What are they going to be interested in reading at some point? They're not, you know, what are they going to read that is about Chinese people? And I also wondered, yeah, I only knew the barest amount about the one-child policy. And, you know, it made me wonder, well, who doesn't get adopted in China? Why don't they get adopted, and what happens to them? So that was essentially the start of how Girls on the Line came to be. You know, Girls on the Line is a bit of a pantser novel. I don't know if you guys know what that means. They say there are plotters and there are pantsers. Plotters are the people who frame out their story ahead of time. They know what's going to happen. They might outline it to varying degrees. Pantsers fly by the seat of their pants. You know, I knew that the adoption of the Chinese girls had to do the one-child policy. So, you know, I began to research, and I wrote, you know, I wrote the novel at the same time I was researching, and it was very interesting because as I was researching it, you know, I would find out these things that would give me ideas for plot points for the novel. So I briefly write about the one-child policy in the author's note at the back of Girls Online. Oh, and this One Child Nation, this is a documentary that came out in 2019, you know, after my book had come out. And it's excellent. It's available on Amazon Prime, and it's by a couple of Chinese filmmakers. I highly recommend it. So again, if you're not familiar with the one-child policy, it was introduced in 1979 to curb population growth and help raise China out of poverty. Every family was allowed to have only one child. Later on, there were some exception made where you could have a second child, but the policy was strictly enforced with severe fines, forced abortions, sterilizations. You know, really strict measures were taken to enforce the policy. And because China has such a strong, traditional, long-held preference for sons, tens and tens of millions of female babies became victims of like infanticide and abandonment. And this led to a huge gender imbalance. They say there's like 30 million more men than women. You know, there's an aging workplace that's not being replaced by, and, you know, there's just a heck of a lot of pressure on young people. You know, and I certainly tried not to get heavy-handed with educating readers about all these issues in the context of the novel, but you know, I was just trying to write a really good story, which is the same as I attempted to do with Like Spilled Water. But when I was finishing Girls on the Line and looking to start a new novel, I actually came from a very different place when I started Like Spilled Water. Let me see. Over the years, I had discovered this whole genre of retellings and riffs on classic novels. And the first retelling of a classic novel I've ever read was Pride and Prejudice and the Zombies. You know, I was initially resistant to reading that book because I'm just not a zombie person. It's just not my thing. But the book kept popping up in front of me, and so I eventually took it and read it and just loved it. I just thought it was so well done. It was just stylistically and humor-wise, it was just beautifully done, and it just opened up that whole retelling and riffs and revamps genre to me. And while I was looking for that new story, The Woman in the Window by A.J. Finn came out around that time, which is a kind of a riff on Rear Window, one of my all-time favorite movies. So, and I was like, oh, why didn't I do that? Why didn't I think of that? And so I tried to think about what are some of my favorite books, and I came up with Rebecca, which has been one of my favorite books since ninth grade. When I first read it, it was on the summer reading list of my school, and I just thought, well, maybe I can do something with that. And it's about a shy, timid English woman who meets and marries a wealthy man and goes to live with him in his huge estate. But she lives in the shadow of what she perceives is his fabulous first wife who had died the previous year. When I tried to think about how I could work with Rebecca, I initially thought I was going to do a story set in the States, but I just couldn't figure out how to make it work. And because I didn't really want to write a story about marriage, I was also coming off of Girls on the Line, and because Rebecca is about jealousy and identity and societal expectation, and it draws on these issues of like class divide, I began to think maybe I can use some of this information I've learned about China, some of this stuff I've learned about China in the story, set it in China with a twist. So specifically, it also made me remember the time I went to China when I was in college to visit my sister. She took me to the countryside, our ancestral home, and my aunt was there, and she was raising my 5-year-old, my cousin, her 5-year-old granddaughter. So Yatza, and Yatza had been left behind by my cousin and his wife because they were working in the city, and they wanted to try to have a boy. They wanted to illicitly try to have a boy because at that time the policy said, one child. And so that's what they did. They had a boy, and they came back to the countryside to visit us while we were there. And I just so remember my little cousins, my 5-year-old cousin's jealous little face, and she didn't want to talk to them. She was very resentful, and that just made such an impression on me. I thought, well, maybe I can make this like a sister and brother story. So, now my cousin was left behind in the countryside because her parents wanted to have another kid, but 61 million kids are left behind in the country in China because of the division between the rural poor and the rising urban class. Adults from the rural areas migrate to the cities to work, and they're usually, low-paying factory jobs. They live in, kind of dorm rooms, and they have to leave their children behind because in China, you can only receive like education and healthcare benefits in your hometown unless you are going to pay for those out of pocket. And a lot of people who are working these low-paying jobs can't afford to do that, and they also would have to pay for childcare because the hours are very long in those jobs. So these children are called the left behind children, and they often see their parents only one time a year at the New Year holiday, and sometimes even less than that. So people used to talk about these single children as little emperors because the parents would dote on these single children like crazy. They would dump all their attention and all their resources on them. They would essentially spoil them, they say. But it's great to be a single child until you're about 3 or 4, when it all becomes about like your education and the pressure to achieve. Traditionally, kids take care of their parents in old age. So if you're the only kid, you're sort of your parents' retirement plan. So you've got to study, you've got to get in the best schools, you got to make money, get married, get the best, have a kid, get the best, and just make enough money to take care of your parents. And I haven't really seen that label little emperor much in the last few years, because I think there's more empathy, more sympathy for how much pressure these kids have as they grow up. And of course, this slide obviously shows, more of like the upper middle class who could afford to take their kids to swim lessons. So if you want your kid to get into the best possible college so that they'll get the best possible job and make enough money to support everybody, in China, the only measure of college admission is the Gaokao, the tall test, which is this grueling 9-hour test taken over 2 or 3 days. And this past June, 10.7 million kids took that test. And there are only so many university and college spots. The competition is extremely, extremely fierce. They don't look at your whole profile. They don't look at essays necessarily or extracurricular activities. It all comes down to this one test, which determines like what school you get into. And with only so many spots, it's so fierce. A lot of, at least the wealthier families, get around it by sending their kids to college in the States. There's an estimated 350,000 students in the United States from China. Some of those are high school students because they start them sometimes in boarding high schools. But this picture here shows kids having IV drips as they study. Kids can study 12 to 16 hours a day as they get closer to the testing time. I've read anecdotes about girls getting on the pill to regulate their menstrual cycle around the test. They're cram boarding schools, and moms who quit work so that they can cook special, meals for their children. But it's extremely, extremely, grueling. And you wonder how these kids can endure this kind of pressure, but that's just how they do it. When you grow up in a culture, the social policies and societal expectation often just set a standard that you don't think to question. And let's see, China has an amazing power of propaganda, and their traditional Confucian and communist ideals about caring for the bigger society and respecting your parents are still very, very deeply rooted, in part because the propaganda about being a good citizen is started very early in school with, there's moral education and citizenship classes, there's textbooks, there's billboards, there's television shows that just, immerse you in, some of these traditional ideas. I think China's censorship powers, even with the internet, has, with blocking content that they deem inappropriate, it has really amazed the Western world, like how much they have been able to control. And these images just show a few billboards that relate to the one-child policy. I heard an interview with the filmmaker of that documentary, One Child Nation, and she said it had never even occurred to her to think about the one-child policy because it just was so just a normal part of daily life that you don't even really think about it. And, until a friend of hers who was like a Western journalist asked her one day at lunch, oh, what was it like to grow up under the one-child policy? So I think that just really speaks to when you're immersed in something, you don't think to necessarily question it. But in 1997, the government noticed the huge gender gap caused by the one-child policy, and they began to worry that all these unmarried men would destabilize the country with like drinking, gambling, sex trafficking, brawling, etc. They decided that women needed to focus more on getting married earlier instead of going for advanced degrees and leaning into their careers. So they started this insidious campaign to pressure young women to get married using the All China Women's Federation, which is supposed to be the government's women's rights organization, to popularize this term "shengnu," which means leftovers, as a way to label women who aren't married by age 27. And they published articles with tips and advice about dating and marriage. There were political cartoons. They just really pushed the term into mainstream media in order to instill feelings of desperation, not only in women, but also in their parents, who are really, really good at nagging their children. And again, you remember that young people in China still regard their parents and elders in a way that it may be hard for American people to understand. So unmarried women dread going home for New Year's because their parents and relatives and neighbors ask them about their relation status. They comment on it endlessly. And, a Chinese person would never be like, oh, shut up, Dad. You just don't say that, which like an American might say. So, the idea has become such part of the daily vernacular that, there are random boyfriend services, there's massive dating events sponsored by the government, and marriage markets where parents go, often without their kids' knowledge, to try to seek out potential mates for their children. So, that's the end of my presentation. These are the things that really struck me while writing my novels, and I kind of wanted to show how these policies and social decisions trickle down into the daily life of average people, especially people who are pushed to the margins, like rural people, women, the young people. My novels are set in China, and of course it's easy to be horrified and look at what's happening over there, but I have to say that when I was writing these novels, it was definitely up and center in my mind about the controversies that exist here in the States about, ideas that are just become ingrained over here in our history of policy making decisions that, that have affected and continue to affect people along racial lines and women's rights and poverty and our own kind of growing economic divide. So that is kind of the end of my presentation. So I'll stop the share there. And then,
Thank you, Jenny. That's just incredible and so filled with information that a lot of us probably don't normally think about. So I'm going to try to digest this and also ask you a few questions. And if anybody else would like to ask a question, please do so in a chat or raise your hand if I can see you. But let's just start off. I wanted to find out more about the market that you mentioned right at the very end of your presentation. It's a big part of your book on Like Spilled Water. And can you explain the title of the book and how that relates?
Okay, Like Spilled Water, that comes from a traditional saying. I think it was from the, I think Romance of the Three Kings, one of the classic novels, but it comes from a saying, having a daughter is like spilled water, because the idea traditionally was that women used to go to their husband's family when they got married, and so they were really of no use to their own family. And it's interesting because when my mom saw the title of that book, I didn't show it to her. She really didn't know about it until, she saw a finished copy, and she was just so aghast. She was like, do you know what you're saying? Do you? She was shocked and tickled and aghast and horrified, and she was like, do you know what that means? Do you know what you're saying? Did I ever say that to you? And of course she never said it to me, but she told me her grandfather used to say it, frequently to her and her sisters, as well as other horrible things.
And then explain about the market that you showed the picture of at the end.
The marriage market, that they seem to have those some in the bigger cities, and it's where parents, usually parents, in a lot of the images and things I've seen, young people might go to and troll around, and parents, they write up a little sheet about a profile about their kids, and there may or may not be a picture, and they put all their stats, things like how height, that's a big thing in China, even in job applications, you write your height and your education, how much money you make, property that you have, and trying to find a blind date for your kid. Yeah.
I didn't know that was real. And your book, that was part of your fictionalized account.
No, that's real. And yeah, I haven't seen any stats on how successful it is or how many marriages really come out of that. There's an excellent documentary on PBS. What is it? One Lens, about the leftover woman phenomena. I don't know if you call it phenomena. Issue is the word.
What about Girls on the Line? Can you explain that title?
That title, that, I think my working title for that book was Aging Out, and an editor didn't really like that title. She suggested I might need a new title. And so my agent and I tossed some ideas back and forth, and I think she came up with On the Line, kind of the factory line, because the girls work in the factory, and also because they're kind of in this tenuous position in life, kind of. So she liked that. I thought that was genius. I think I added girls because at the time I was reading suspense novels like Girl on a Train and those, and I kind of was looking towards having that kind of fast-paced novel. You know.
Both of your novels are very fast-paced. I found myself reading them without stopping for hours, and then I read each of them twice because when I get so absorbed in something, I feel like I've missed it, you know. And that happened with both of your novels, and so I'd like to talk about this because they are labeled as young adult. I do work in a library. I'm not a librarian. I'm an avid reader. And so because I'm an avid reader, I think I've never really thought about the young adult genre. I have read Hunger Games and Harry Potter and other, you know, very popular series, but I don't go browse the young adult shelves. That's changed since meeting you a couple of months ago via email. But I was blown away by the subject matter because it is very intense. It's about sex trafficking. You know, there's so many things that I wouldn't necessarily have thought of being a part of a young adult novel. So can you explain this genre and explain a little bit about why you're in that?
Yeah, I think we were talking beforehand that Girls on the Line wasn't necessarily written as a young adult novel. I had that previous novel that I was working on. Because the character was 13, at first we had proposed it as literary fiction, and we didn't get a lot of response, I think because the field is so wide and vast. And then when my agent suggested we pitch it as young adult, we got a lot more feedback, a lot more just input. And so when I had finished this Girls on the Line in the meantime, and when we were ready to pitch it, my agent suggested, well, the characters are 16 and 17. Should we pitch it as young adult? And I was like, sure, I guess so. And I actually had not read much either as in the young adult genre, but I got my young adult education pretty quick, as I call it. I started reading, and I was very concerned initially that it was too adult for a young adult, but boy, that was ignorance on my part. Because it seems to be no holds barred in young adult. There's all the subgenres within young adult. It's fascinating. It's wonderful. And I forgot what the second part of the question was.
I think this is my introduction back into the young adult genre as well. I am looking into it now.
I was actually interested to learn, over the last couple of years, that like half of young adult literature is read by adults.
Yes, that is true. Well, before we go, I would like to offer up the chance for anybody to ask a question if you would like to. I have one more thing to say. I wanted to say, Jennie, thank you. And like I said, I am an avid reader, and what really strikes me about your books, and I told you this ahead of time, but I would like to tell the audience that after a little bit, when reading a book like yours, it's almost as if the words are no longer there and you're immersed in the scenery and the smells and the sounds and the voices, and everything becomes a living movie in your mind, I feel, when I'm reading a great book. And that's how your books, both of them, were to me. And I read them so fast, and I watched this incredible movie that left me breathless each time. That's why I went back, so I could actually read the words. I wanted to see then, oh, how did she put these words together to create that? So I looked at it critically like that, just because I was so interested in the style. But thank you very much for that education for me. And thank you, everybody, for being here. And Jenny, I so appreciate your time. We're thrilled. We're going to be sending this recording out to Lake County Schools. So hi, everybody, if you see this later. Both of these books are available. This is available at the library. This is on order. And so as soon as we get your new book in, that'll be available for people to borrow as well. Or if you can't wait, you can go out and purchase it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deb. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it, and for your comments and for taking the time to read. I really, really appreciate that.
Oh, it was fantastic. Great meeting you. Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, everybody. We'll end here. Bye-bye.